we want to look at the management of contracts. Why are contracts important? Contracts are important because you find that everything, the employment relationship, starts with the contract of employment. So when you are running a payroll system, when you are running your payroll, the guidelines to running that payroll are contained in a contract of employment. You're going to find that the contract of employment directs us as to what to pay an employee, when to pay the employee, and how to pay the employee. So a good payroll administrator should then be able to understand and interpret the contracts of employment. Now let's have a definition of what a contract of employment is. Now, as a definition, a contract of employment, it is an agreement between two contracting parties. And for it to be binding, both parties must have the ability to contract. Now, when you talk of the ability to contract, we are basically saying that each party should be in a reasonable state, an acceptable state, where they are in their right set of mind to be able to enter into that agreement. If there are any conditions where the right state of mind is not found, you're going to find that that contract becomes null and void. Now, there are two instances which I can give very quickly where we are saying that an employee or one of the parties is not in a contracting state. Number one, if one of the parties is a minor child, which means somebody under the age of 18, maybe they are 16, 15. Such minors cannot enter into a contract of employment. Why? Because we believe that they are not yet mature enough to understand all the parameters that would have been set in a contract of employment. This is one of the main premises why we cannot engage or we cannot hire children to work for us. It's because they do not have the legal capacity to contract. The second instance that comes to mind is if you have also people with mental challenges. Maybe they have a mental illness or they have a mental disability. Again, they will not be able to conceptualize the full extent of the parameters in a contract of employment. So if you have somebody who is mentally ill, we also consider them not to be in a contracting capacity. So when you enter into a contract of employment, both parties must be able to have the ability to contract. And also, when they agree, there must be witnesses to the agreement. So you find that a contract of employment must always have a place where somebody has to sign. Now, when we zoom in on the contract of employment, we are then saying this is an agreement between an employer and an employee. And it has set terms and conditions. In other words, it tells us the conditions of employment. It tells us the conditions of work. What time does work start? What time does work end? And you find that it then gives us those parameters. Even the grade the employee will be in, they're employed as who, what they're actually going to be paid, upon how much time they're going to be paid. Is it after a week? Is it after a fortnight? Is it after a month? You know, the pay cycle itself, how much leave they're going to be getting. So these conditions are set in a contract of employment. But one major item is that it is subordinate in nature. What does that mean? It means that when you enter into a contract of employment, it is different from when you enter into a contract between two companies or a contract between a landlord and a tenant. Why? Because with this one, a contract of employment is subordinate in nature. What does that mean? When you talk of subordination, we are saying one of the parties has to then subordinate themselves. In other words, they give up certain privileges. For instance, when you enter into a contract of employment, it dictates what time you should start work. It dictates what time you should finish work. Now, with that, an employee, if they want that contract of employment to hold, they then have to subordinate themselves to those conditions of employment. So it is subordinate in nature. In fact, you'll find that if you look at some of the statutory instruments, if you look at some of the codes of conduct, you have the SI 15 of 2006, which is a National Code of Conduct. You'll find that there is a clause in there, one of the offenses that you find in there. It says willful disobedience to a lawful order. In other words, we call that insubordination, where an employee does not subordinate themselves to a lawful order, to a condition of employment. And when they do that, that is actually a dismissible offense. So when you're now managing your contracts, you need to realize that employees and the employer are not at par. Yes, an employee is bringing in services. Yes, an employee is bringing in skill, but the employer has the upper hand. Why? Because they are the ones who are providing the job to be done. So when you're managing your contracts of employment, it's important to realize that they are subordinate in nature. All right. Now, if you look at the objectives that I have today, basically I'm saying a payroll administrator must be able to interpret contracts of employment, and they must be able to design contracts of employment that are functional and have no points of dispute. So when you look at the functionality of contracts of employment, when you do the diploma course with us, we'll ensure that you should then, at the end of the diploma course, you must have enough skill, enough knowledge to be able to create your own contracts of employment. Why? Because you find that before you start running a payroll system, you need to refer to a contract of employment. And if there are no valid contracts of employment, to process a payroll becomes very difficult. So it's important to realize that the foundation of payroll processing lies and rests within a contract of employment. Now, let's look at the legal areas in terms of contracts of employment. Let's look at the legal foundation that we have for contracts of employment. Number one, Section 12 of the Labor Act, subsection 1, gives us two types of contracts. It gives us, number one, what is called a verbal contract. And this is a contract which is not written down. And number two, we have a written contract. That means the conditions of that contract are reduced to writing. So subsection 1 of section 12, you can take these and you can open up your Labor Act. I hope you have a copy of the Labor Act. If you don't, you can download it from Google. It is available. We are saying from section 12, and if you look at section 12, it's looking at the conditions of employment. Section 12, subsection 1, it gives us these two types of contracts. Now, when you look at a verbal contract, it is a contract where we also refer to it as a gentleman's agreement. Basically, we are saying that both parties agree to the contract, but they don't write it down. Now, these verbal contracts, according to employment, are usually common on domestic work, our maids and gardeners. You'll find that we do not normally give them contracts of employment, but we give them a verbal contract. We will say, if you give me these services at the end of the month, I'm going to pay you so much. Now, when you look at these verbal contracts, they have one major disadvantage, which is that they do not have a point of reference because it is not written down. So you find that in the corporate world, verbal contracts, we do not encourage them, because if there is, for some reason, a dispute that takes place, there will be no points of reference. And usually, if that dispute then goes to the courts are lenient with an employee. So you find that their word is taken more seriously than the employer's word. So it is important then to try and make sure that you always have your contracts of employment written down, especially in the corporate world. Now, since they are reduced to writing, you're going to find that is on subsection 1. If you go to subsection 2, section 12, subsection 2, it gives us the salient features of a contract of employment. In other words, it gives us a model contract. whereby when you are creating your own contracts or you are managing your own contracts, it is important to ensure that you also have these features in a good contract of employment. What are they? I'm just going to run through them. Number one, a contract must be on a company letterhead. That is very important. I've seen certain contracts being on a blank page, certain contracts being on just plain pages. It's important to put a logo and a company letterhead. Why? Because it is a provision in subsection 2 of section 12. It is a provision that the employer's details must be found on a contract of employment. And therefore, the best way to display these employer details is on a letterhead, because a letterhead then gives us the company name, it gives us the company details, it gives us the address, and it gives us even the contact details of that company. So when you're now coming up with your own contracts, ensure that you put them on a letterhead. Now, number two, the contract must be self-defining. What type of contract is it? We've got quite a number of contracts. They've got what we call open-ended contracts. We also have what we call fixed-term contracts. All of these types of contracts, you now need to define the contract that you have issued to your employee. Is it an open-ended contract? Is it a fixed-term contract? And this is, again, another provision in subsection 2. Number 3, terms of probation and notice. These two are very important. I'm going to be discussing these shortly with you. But it's important then to also notify an employee through a contract of employment the probationary period that they're going to undertake, as well as notice if they so wish to resign or terminate the contract of employment. Number 4, the type of code of conduct to be used for discipline. This is very, very important. If you are going to discipline your employees, you need to indicate the type of disciplinary code you are going to use on the employee. Now, on this particular point, we have 3 different types of codes. Number 1, we have the National Code of Conduct, which is your SI 15 of 2006. This is the National Code of Conduct, and it is basically designed for companies that do not have an internal code of conduct, and they can use this. It is applicable in any industry. It has 8 offenses, and they are all dismissible offenses. So the second type of contract code of conduct that we have is the Industrial Code of Conduct. Normally, this one is crafted by a National Employment Council, an NEC, and clients and companies within that industry are then obliged to use that code of conduct. And then the third one is now an internal code, one which is then developed within the confines of the company. And this one is then created to meet the needs of the company. You'll find that if you use a national code, sometimes it has what we call vagueness, which means the code does not address certain offenses that you find grave in your organization. So a national code may not address those. Even an industrial code may not address some of these things. Therefore, an internal code would be good, because an internal code also then captures things such as your company values, company culture, which you can have. You'll find that, I'll give you an example. You may have a company culture which is goal-oriented or result-oriented. So you'll find that if you are goal-oriented or result-oriented, you are not really worried as to what time employees start work, so long as they meet their targets. So you'll find that if somebody is late for work with 30 minutes, the company is not really fussy about that, because even if they come at 9, come at 10, if they meet their targets, then all is fine and square. That is a culture that one can exude. But you can also have a company in the same industry, but with a different culture. Maybe their culture is service-oriented. It is client-oriented. whereby we are saying we should be there for our clients. Therefore, we need to start work at 8 o'clock because clients can start looking for us. So you find that if somebody comes to work late, that is a very grave misconduct as compared to one coming with a target-oriented or goal-oriented culture. So when you now come up with your code of conduct, when you now come up with your code of conduct, if it is an internal code, you're going to realize that it is actually very good because it will capture those things that may be vague. That's on the code of conduct. One more point under the code of conduct: if you then do not tell the system or tell the employee the code of conduct you're going to use for discipline, you are not allowed to dilly-dally on the code that you're supposed to use. In other words, you cannot come today and say, for you today, this offense that you've committed, we are going to use this code of conduct, an internal code. Then tomorrow, you've done another offense. Oh, we are going to use the industrial code. I think that's the one that's most appropriate. And then the next time, yes, you say, I'm going to use the national code. We are not allowed to do that. An employee can contest this at law, and it can be dismissed on a technicality. What is important is that if you then tell an employee through a contract of employment that we are going to be using the SI 15 of 2006, you need to stick to it and use that particular code. So by being silent in a contract of employment, you find that this can create an area of conflict because an employee will not know which code is going to be used for discipline. So it is important for us to indicate the type of code in a contract of employment. Number 5, particulars of remuneration, calculation, and the intervals to be paid. Now that is real payroll, where we are saying a contract of employment must indicate the pay package an employee is going to receive. Is the one and indicate how much, indicate how we are calculating that particular earning. If it is a commission, is it a percentage? At which it's going to be paid. A contract of employment must tell us when the employee is going to be paid. Are they paid on the 25th of the month? Are they paid on every week? Are they paid on the last day of the month? A contract of employment must not be silent in regards to this, but it must indicate the intervals at which the employee is going to be paid. And then it should also indicate benefits during sickness and pregnancy. That is important. And it should also indicate bonuses and incentives. That is also important and clear. Able to tell us how much the employee is going to accrue in terms of leave. I think in one of our sessions we did leave management, where we looked at, sorry about that, where we looked at vacation leave and the annual leave rate being 30 or 22 or 26. You need to be able to indicate to an employee these as well. And then any other benefits that the employee is going to receive, like your housing benefit, motoring benefit. But you need to be careful when you're putting through allowances and benefits on a contract of employment. Why should you take caution? You must take caution. Why? Because whatever you are going to put on a contract of employment, it is actually going to become a right to that particular employee. And therefore, they can claim that right. And you are obliged to pay that right. So be very careful. If you're going to put through a clause for bonuses, a clause for benefits, and you so wish to withdraw them, make sure you also have the legal wording in your contract whereby you'll be able to withdraw those items. Now, the two periods that we talked of on the contract of employment, I'm just going to take you through now. What we've just finished looking at are the salient features that are found in a contract of employment. Make sure that when you're creating your contract, you can even have a look at your own contracts currently, and you can see what you have there as well. So with a contract of employment, it should also then give us these two periods, and they should be clearly defined. The first one being the probationary period. And so with probation, if you are to give a definition, a probation, this is a period of assessment by either party to the conditions of employment. When an employee comes into a contract of employment, they can now assess the terms and conditions of that contract. So it is important for them to be able to assess. Same goes for the employer. They are supposed to be able to assess, because when an employee is engaged, all they bring with them is a CV and a promise that they are able to do the work. And so an employer is given a period to be able to assess, to see if the employee actually possesses the skills that they have said they have. So if you look at this, at the Labor Act, Section 12, and you look at subsection 5, it gives us the parameters of probation. And let's just quickly go through them. Number 1, it must be single, which means it is one per contract. What does this mean? If an employee completes probation, they can never go back on probation again once it is complete. Meaning that they only have one probationary period per each contract that they are offered. If your contracts are rolling over, there is no need to then also give them a probationary period again. Number 2, it is non-renewable. In other words, it cannot be extended. And then number 3, it is 1 day for seasonal work or casual work and 3 months in any other case. So for your permanent and your fixed term, it is always fixed. Now, for your contracts of employment, sorry, I think my network was doing a bit of dancing there. It wasn't stable. Now, for your probationary period, it is 1 day for seasonal work or casual work and 3 months in any other case. So any other contract that you give outside a seasonal contract or a casual contract, it is 3 months. And then notice during probation is a maximum of 2 weeks. So during the first 3 months of probation, it means that if either party wants to terminate the contract of employment, they must give notice. And they must give 2 weeks notice to the other party that we are going to be terminating the contract of employment. The second period that I also want us to look at under management of contracts is also the notice period. As a definition, notice period, it is a period to notify either party of the intention to terminate the contract of employment. So when you talk of notice, we're simply saying either party is notifying the other party to say we are terminating our contract. And the length of notice to be given depends on the length of the contract. And I've put through an aggregate there where you can see for open-ended contracts, it is 3 months. For fixed term, which is 2 years or more, it is 3 months as well. And then for fixed term, between 1 year and 2 years, it is 2 months. Between 6 months and 1 year, it is 1 month. Between 3 months and 6 months, it is 2 weeks. And fixed term, between 0 months and 3 months, it is 1 day, which is 24 hours. So why is notice very important? Notice is important because it has to be observed by either party. Both parties have a claim towards notice. Both parties have a right towards notice. So notice is not just for the employee, but also an employer can claim notice, meaning that every employee must observe the parameters of notice pay. If an employer wants to terminate a contract of employment, a payroll administrator must then be able to advise the employer as to the implication of terminating prematurely a contract of employment. And if the employer so wishes to proceed with the termination, then they must be able to pay notice period to an employee. That is very important. On the flip side, if an employee also fails to serve notice, an employer can demand for the notice period and the amount to be given during that notice period. And so it is important for us to be able to know the different periods of notice and be able to assign the appropriate period for notice. Now, as I come to an end of my presentation for today, there are several types of contracts that we have. The first being an open-ended contract. This is a contract without a limit of time. That's why it is called open-ended. It is open-ended, meaning that it has no fixed duration. So we have a start date, but we don't have an end date. And these are the most common contracts that are issued to employees in Zimbabwe, though shift is now moving on to fixed term contracts. Now with a fixed term contract, this is a contract that has a start date and also has an end date. And so you'll find that with such a contract of employment, an employee must know when they're starting and they should know when they're finishing. These contracts are referred to as self-terminating contracts, where they actually terminate as soon as the expiry date arrives. Now, with this one, there is no need to notify an employee because fixed-term contracts, we call them self-terminating contracts. So an employee is notified of a termination of a contract the day they engage and start working for the employer, because the day they are engaged, they are also notified of the date when their contract is going to expire. The third one is now your seasonal contracts. These are contracts that are normally common, especially in the agricultural sector, where a contract is linked to a particular season of the year and the particular activities that should be done in that particular period. Now, with seasonal contracts, you'll find that once a season then passes, that contract comes to an end. Okay, and then the next one is your casual contract. With your casual contract, this is a contract that is given for casual work. Now, the Labor Act, if you go to Section 2 of the Labor Act, which is interpretation, there is interpretation of casual employment or casual work. And it is defined as work that is done within 6 weeks in any 4 consecutive months. And so if you find that your employee is going to work for less than 6 weeks in any 4 consecutive months, they are considered to be casual employees. Now, with these casual contracts, you'll find that they are usually very simple and are reserved for menial work, such as offloading trucks, such as doing gardening or any other extra help required in an organization. Now, casual contracts, you'll find that the major feature about a casual contract is that whatever you're going to pay an employee, it is double the rate of a fixed term contract. Why? Because a casual contract an employee does not have benefits on a casual contract. They don't accrue leave. They don't join a pension scheme. So you find that a casual contract will then compensate an employee by paying them double the rate for that work that they do. And then the last one is the independent contractor, where we are saying an independent contractor, this is now a consultant, somebody who is doing that work on their own. Again, this is where we are saying this is not really a contract of employment, but it resembles a contract of employment. It looks like a contract of employment, but it's an actual business arrangement between an employer and a contractor. So you may find that within this particular type of contract, it may be similar with a contract of employment. Okay. All right. So these are the types of contracts that we have. And this is what I just wanted to share with you very briefly today as we are looking at the contracts management. The topic itself is quite long. I just decided to take this introductory stage so that we could show each other and discuss a bit about these contracts. Otherwise, there's quite a lot in terms of management of contracts. The other flip side is you look at the common practices and some of the pitfalls that you can come across when you're managing contracts. You've got practices such as casualization, practices such as unfair dismissals, practices such as constructive dismissal, practices such as legitimate expectation, where an employee has a genuine expectation to be engaged again. Okay. There's also the aspect of termination of contracts, which we haven't looked at, but here you'll be looking at how to terminate contracts and what are the terminal benefits that employees must access. So you'll find that contracts is a very broad topic, and I may bring it on again later on, so we'll be able to discuss on those other aspects as well. Or if you so wish, you can also join us in our diploma class. This is the kind of stuff that we'll be looking at and we'll be going through during that course. Otherwise, at this particular juncture, I want to open up. If there are any questions that you guys may have, you may go ahead and unmute yourself and you may ask your question.
Thank you, Nick. Good morning.
Good morning, Colin. How are you?
I'm very well. I just wanted to ask something on probation.
Okay.
Since it's a once-off thing, is it possible when it comes to promoting someone to another position, is it possible to place him also on another probation for the new position?
Okay.
That's my question.
So you are saying somebody has been promoted and they now have a new position, and now should we issue a new contract of employment for them?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you very much for that question, Colin. Now, when an employee is promoted, there is no need to issue them with a new contract of employment. What you can do is you can issue them with two things that you can do. You can have an addendum, which is an alteration on their existing contract, and have it on file, or you can also put through that confirmation letter confirming that they've now been upgraded, they've now gone to a new position. That confirmation letter can then also read into a contract of employment, where you're then saying, for instance, if you were in, I'll give you a good example, if you were in a graded position, in other words, it is a grade that is recognized at NEC, and then you're promoted to become a manager. Now you are an ungraded employee. You find that now some benefits that you're enjoying is under NEC, such as transport and housing, may fall away. And so in a confirmation letter, you then need to also highlight those and then also reference to the contract of employment. And once you do that, that will suffice usually. What becomes tricky is a demotion. A promotion is quite easy. That confirmation letter can be attached to an employee's contract of employment, and that can go through. A demotion now becomes very difficult because now you have to negotiate with the employee, and if you are demoting them to a lower grade, that way you now need to definitely do an addendum on their contract of employment so that it reflects the new downgraded grade. But in Zimbabwe, as you know, once you begin to give an employee a particular salary, you are not allowed to reduce their salary unless it has gone through a negotiated process with the Works Council as well as the Workers' Committee. You cannot just wake up and say, we're reducing your salary as willy-nilly. That becomes a problem. So to answer you in short, yes, you don't have to issue a new contract. You can either do an addendum or a reference letter, a confirmation letter, which references the contract, highlighting the areas that have changed for that promotion will suffice.